So, like I said, this is a really introductory talk. I'm really going to try and take you through some of the basics and show you some of the things that we would recommend for building applications. So before we start, I should probably introduce myself. So my name is Muir. I've worked for JBoss for quite a long time. Now, I've nearly always worked in the area of developer productivity, building applications, that kind of thing. So I very much focus on how you guys can build applications easily with JBoss, and it's kind of my job to make sure that we get you guys being productive. So if you're not productive with JBoss, then I'm probably the person to come and complain to. So, and that leads me in very neatly to my session objective, which is really that my goal of this session is to show you how to be productive with JBoss, building applications, building web applications. So I'm going to give you a short intro to some of the resources we have available, just to give you guys a bit of an overview of what's out there. This is very much a kind of a, here's what's available, go away and have a look at home and have a look at what you can use at home. So I'm going to go quickly through that. The bulk of the presentation will be me doing some coding, doing some deployment to OpenShift, getting down into the nitty-gritty of the application. What I'm hoping to achieve by the end of the session is to have built a small application with a couple of database tables in it, built out the business logic for that, built some REST endpoints, built a simple view layer based around AngularJS, get that up on OpenShift, and hopefully if we have time and the internet and the Wi-Fi gods are with me, add MySQL to that on OpenShift and probably some testing. So the goal is to show you how quick it is to just get started building the application. Obviously then the hard work has to come later, and we're not going to do the hard work in this session, the hard work of actually implementing your business requirements. That's something, however much tooling we build, is still going to be difficult. So what's the JBoss way? So my colleague Ray, who just came in and very kindly brought me a glass of water, has a long talk in Summit about what the JBoss way is. But really simple, the JBoss way is some opinionated advice from us about how to build applications. So we feel that, especially in the Java space, there's not enough opinionated advice about how to do stuff. There's lots of advice about you can do this, or you can do this, or you can do this, or you can do this. And we wanted to actually say, well, we think the best way to do it is this, and this is what we're focusing on. So that's the JBoss way. It sounds like you guys are experienced with Java EE and with JBoss, so you'll know the rest of this, right? It's based around Java EE, it's based around CDI, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the highlights of the JBoss way? This slide started off about 2 years ago, and it was like 2 bullet points and about that long, and now it's about this long because we've added more resources, and I probably should make it into 2 slides now looking at it. But we've focused a lot on this idea of quick starts. So I suspect you've heard me talk about quick starts before, or someone talk about quick starts before. But the goal of a quick start is it's a really focused little application, standalone application built using Maven that focuses on showing you how to do one thing. So it might be something really straightforward, like how do I write a hello world example with servlet? Or it might be something really complicated, like how do I do distributed transaction recovery with multiple JBoss nodes? But in each case, it's focusing on showing you how to do that one single thing and not trying to show you how to do everything. That's great, and it solves a lot of problems, but sometimes it's useful to have a broader example. And there we have a big example of Ticket Monster, which adds technologies, which builds out an application and then adds technologies like PhoneGap and JBoss Data Grid. If you're using Maven, we've got lots of helpful stuff for working with Maven. If you've used Maven, you'll probably have come across this idea of a BOM. A BOM simply specifies a set of versions of dependencies that work well together. And so we've defined them for most of the core technologies within the JBoss product line. And of course, sometimes you need to migrate. So we've been working very hard on trying to improve how easy it is, or improve the resources available for migrating to JBoss. With a focus on the application side around Spring, Scene 2, and Java EE 5. And then on the server side, I think particularly around WebLogic. So yeah, quick starts, JBoss Stack. So if you're interested in, so I can use my laptop. Yep, perfect. If you're interested in this, your best resource is to go to the jboss.org/JDF website, which provides you with access to all of these quick starts. So you can go in and very easily find the one you're interested in. So I was talking about transaction recovery. So if we have a look for that, yeah, we've got the JTA crash rec there, so takes you through how to download the quick start and how to get started using it. And then, once you've got it up and running, you can look at the source code. The source code is pretty heavily commented, so you can understand how it works. Ticket Monster, like I said, much larger example. And this one we've really focused not only on building out the source code and showing you how to use the source code with, how to build the application. We've also written a big tutorial to go with it that takes you through not only how we built the application, but why we made the choices we did when we architected the application that way. So that goes back to my point about this being opinionated advice. We're not just saying this is how you do it, we're also saying this is why we would choose this way of doing it. Again, if you're interested in Ticket Monster, JDS site can help you. Go to the examples section. You can find links to the tutorial here. The tutorial is about 150 pages long, so it's pretty in-depth, pretty comprehensive. We have comments in all of these pages, so if you go down to the bottom of any of these pages, there's discuss comments there, and you can ask questions about how you do stuff or why we've done stuff in a particular fashion. So that really brings me on to what I want to spend the bulk of today about, which is actually building this application and getting it up on OpenShift. So what are we doing here? Well, getting started is a pretty sucky experience, especially with Java, right? I mean, actually, it's pretty. I write quite a lot of Ruby nowadays, and my boss was complaining at me ethically the other day. He was like, "If only you had written this in Java, it would have been really easy to get started and get this all up and running quickly." And so I think getting started sucks wherever you are, not just a Java problem, but also integrating different libraries, adding different libraries into your project can be quite hard. Which configuration file do I put where? If I configure this like this, and then I add this other library, how does it all work together? As we all get older and get more grey hairs, remembering stuff becomes harder and harder, and luckily Google gets better and better at finding things, so I guess that problem kind of sorts itself out. And repetitive tasks are really annoying and frustrating, and they make you go a little bit mad. So luckily we have a solution for this. It's called JBoss Forge. It solves some of these problems. It helps you get started quickly, and it does a lot of the integration and repetitive work for you. So what are we going to do today? As I said, we're going to get started. We're going to get some stuff up and running, get some different frameworks and libraries integrated, and we're going to get a good application up on OpenShift. And we're going to do this all quickly. So I've got how much time? So with this introduction, I always spend different amounts of time talking in the introduction, and I can leave myself different amounts of time to do this. Well, I've got about 30 minutes, I think. So I better get started before I run out of time. Oh, right. Okay, so I'm using JBoss Developer Studio. People use JBoss Developer Studio here? A few? Okay, so JBoss Developer Studio is really a set of plugins for Eclipse. You've got two options. You can either download the full binary, install it on your computer and get going, or you can take your own Eclipse and drop the plugins into it. That's what we call the bring your own Eclipse mode. Both work, completely freely available. You just go to the JBoss.org website, available for download. If you're using Eclipse and you work with Java EE, you should be using this. It is the most comprehensive set of plugins for Java EE. Even if you're not using JBoss, it's the most comprehensive set of plugins, so use it. And I've got Forge up and running down here at the bottom. I'm going to move this somewhere else so that we can see it a bit better. And I'm going to break everything. There we go. So I've got Forge console up there. Can you guys see that? Is that too small, the text on it? I'm using the wrong workspace, so I'm just going to bump up the text size on this. So we'll just bump that up to like 18. Much better. Right, I think we can all see that now. So Forge is at its core is a command line tool, but there's also IDE wizards that do quite a lot of the key things. So we can either do this from the command line, or we can do this from an IDE wizard. I'm going to use the command line because I'm a command line kind of guy, but it's pretty easy to do it either way. So key command to start with is new project. This gets you a new project set up quickly and easily. So obviously we need to give it a name. And as you'll see, I didn't actually type -- name that quickly. We have tab completion in Forge, so it's really easy to understand what you have to do. So I'm going to call it RH sessions. I'm just going to build a quick app so that we can register people at different sessions. So you can see that's going to create a basic Maven project for us. Forge is heavily based around Maven because at the end of the day, if you're going to work with some kind of project management tool, you really need a declarative build system underneath so that you can manipulate the build easily. Having done that, we probably want to add some capabilities to our applications. So, we're going to need things like servlets, like CDI, like EJB, like JPA, etc., to do all the capabilities that we need. So again, really easy to get started doing that. You just run various commands to set up these technologies. They're all pretty standard. It's going to ask me a load of questions. So as we do this, it starts to configure the project. So for example, when I installed Servlet, what it did was it set up the web app directory and it edited the POM to make sure I had a dependency on Servlet available. Also changed the packaging type of the POM to war so that we're now building a war project. So we're going to need some other ones. JPA would be a good one. Oh, let me do this one. So we have to tell JPA that we're using Hibernate, and we need to tell it that the container is EAP6. So let's do that. So as you can see, this is pretty tightly integrated into Eclipse. So as we start editing files or adding files in Forge, it will bring them up in Eclipse so I can see what's going on. If you've got a bigger screen than I've got on this projector and you've got things laid out nicely in Eclipse, then you'll see it better than you see it on my screen here. So JPA, what else do I need? I needed CDI. I need JAX-RS, so do a REST setup. I need bean validation, so I can do a validation setup. I think that's a good lot to get started with. Let's put out EJB just for safety. Okay, so that's now my project. It's now got quite a lot of capabilities in it. So if we went to look at the POM, we would see that we have all these dependencies now declared in the POM, all the right versions selected for you. And if I just reset the perspective here, we'll see all of that in Eclipse as well. Yep, so we'll see that things like on the left-hand side, you can see that this has also managed to configure things like the JPA tools in Eclipse, the web services tools, the JAX-RS web services tools in Eclipse. So we're now pretty much ready to do something with the project. And this is where it's useful if I introduce one of what I think is the key features of Forge. So there's been a number of these sorts of tools around over the years, and I think they really fall into two different camps. So some of them work by creating classes in your project that have some kind of Forge magic embedded into them to do stuff for you. And the disadvantage of those is that if you then decide, well, I don't want my project to be based on Forge anymore, I want my project to be based on some other technology, you're in a bind because you've got all this Forge magic woven into your project, and it's going to be really hard to migrate away. Or let's say you've chosen this at your company and you decide to leave because of some problem or another, and you need to find a replacement for yourself. Again, how many jobs are there out there that people who know how to do this? The other way, which is the way we went with Forge, is what Forge is actually generating here is pure Java EE code. So all the code that's put in your project is plain Java EE. It doesn't reference anything outside of the Java EE specification. And I think that's really important because it means that the skills that you need to edit this project once it's created are just Java EE skills. There's nothing else in there. Forge does this by trying as far as possible to not insert its own configuration into the project. It tries to read the existing metadata that's in the project. So it uses the POM from Maven. It uses the XML files, the deployment descriptor XML files that are in the project to understand what the project does and to configure the project. This has the added advantage that you can do stuff outside of Forge, and when you go back to Forge, you can then operate on those classes or operate on those things as though you had done them inside Forge. So I often, for me, the next thing to do with this application is to create some data, put some data into the application so we can start to build out the application. And for me, the way I want to do that is by editing this in a Java editor. I'm not going to sit there and type some Forge commands to create fields in my entities and to add things to my entities. I'm just going to put some Java code in using the editor and then just work with that from Forge. But before I do that, I do want to set up the entities I'm going to need from inside Forge, because again, I can't be bothered to scaffold out, create the boilerplate for my entities on my own. I'm just going to use Forge to do that for me. So I can use the entity command to create a new entity, and I'm going to call one attendee. And that creates, all that boilerplate that I need for the entity up there in my Java editor. And I'm going to create another one called session. So I've now got my two entities, but like I said, now I can go into the Java class itself and just start editing the Java class. There's no need to do everything through Forge. So with the attendee, I think what I'm going to do is give each attendee a name, and I'm going to give them. I think I'm going to give them I'm going to try and give them give them an email address. Okay, and I'm obviously going to need some getters and setters for that, so I'm just going to use the Eclipse wizards to do that. So we just set those. So that's good. So we've got those, and obviously we're then going to create some sessions that people can go to. So again, we want to give the session a name, and I think what we want is probably a list of attendees for each session. So let's create that. Oh. We sort out the imports, so that's that one. That's good. And then we're going to need to put a JPA entity on this to say this is a one-to-many relationship. And we better generate the getters and setters again. Okay, so that's good. So hopefully that will now work. Let me just check I got that right, because I don't want to get that wrong. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, okay. So that's good. We've got our entities set up, our tables set up, and when we deploy that to JBoss, it will run that for us. So the next thing I wanted to do while we're in the back end is actually add some beam validation to this. And the reason that we're going to add beam validation is so that we can put constraints on the data to say that we don't want invalid data going into the database. How many people have used beam validation here? A few? So what's good about beam validation is it allows me to specify the constraints on the entity class and have them propagated throughout the application. So these constraints will be, as far as possible, put into the database when we generate the database schema. They'll be applied by Hibernate when we actually save the entities down into the database. And we can also, when we generate the view layer, we're going to see that these constraints are also applied in the view layer. So, for example, we could say that the name of the session cannot be null, and we can say that it must have a minimum. I think it's linked. Is it linked? Size. Yeah. So we can say that the name of the session must be at least 5 characters long, for example. Let me sort out again the imports on this. So we can see. Yeah, we can say that the name. So the name of the session must be a minimum of 5 characters and a maximum of 100 characters, let's say, and a message of Okay, that's good. Yep. And we could do the same for all the other fields that we've set up inside this. So for example, if I go back to the attendee, we could say that the email address must be a valid email. Right. Oh no, we can't do that. Okay, so I don't have the constraint for email imported. And this actually raises a good point about beam validation. So beam validation provides a number of constraints out of the box, like the ones we just saw, right? Size and not null. It also provides really easily the ability for you to write your own constraints. So you don't need to just use the ones that are available. You can also go out and really easily write your own ones. And you just write an annotation, like @email, for example, and then you add a constraint and you tie some Java code to that annotation and say, this is the constraint, the validator that runs to create this constraint. And this is really, and the way this works is really clever because what it does in the back end is it actually builds up constraints out of a number of sub-constraints. So for example, with an email, you could say, well, the first thing we know about an email is it must be a string. The second thing we know about an email is it must match this regular expression. Maybe the third thing is it can't be null. So what you can do is you can actually say when you create your email constraint, this is an email constraint and it's composed of these other 2 or 3 sub-constraints. This is really important because it means that if you're, for example, building a view layer, you can actually implement, and maybe you're building a view layer in JavaScript and you want your validators to run in JavaScript without sending data back to the server side, you can very easily do that. So let me not do that because that doesn't work. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, having created these endpoints, created these entities, I'm now going to need a way to interact with them. And I'm going to use JaxRS, going to use REST to do that. So really easy to run. I set up, added JaxRS to the project earlier. So really easy to generate some CRUD endpoints for these, some CRUD REST endpoints for these entities. So I just use the REST command again, and I use endpoint from entity, and I say I'm going to create a JSON because JSON is much easier to work with than XML for JavaScript frameworks, and I tell it, you know, what entities I want to generate from. So that then, as you saw, generated a couple of Java classes. And if we go into those Java classes, we can see what I was talking about earlier, which is this is just pure, plain Java EE JaxRS code that we've generated here. It has the kind of methods you would expect for CRUD on it, delete methods, finding methods, updating methods to add changes. So very quickly, we've managed to create some REST endpoints that can interact with our entities. So that's good. So we now can interact with it. But the final thing we need to do is, as a person, you know, I can't really interact with REST endpoints. REST endpoints are pretty difficult to interact with as a human. So what I'm going to do is create a quick view layer to allow us to interact with that. And I'm going to use the AngularJS framework on the client side to do this. Are people here familiar with AngularJS? A couple? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to do that. Again, it's, you know, really easy with Forge. You just we need the scaffold plugin, so I'm going to run the setup on that, and I tell it to use AngularJS. Questions. And that's if I just expand the Forge console, we can see that has actually now started to do quite a lot of work for us. So it's pulled in AngularJS. It's set up some icons. It's set up some. This is using Bootstrap, so it's set up the Bootstrap framework for us. You know, install all of that into the right place in the project. So that's the scaffolding set up, and the next thing I need to do is just run the scaffold. So I'll just go back to the root directory and then run the scaffold. So run from. So again, I tell it about the entities we're going to scaffold from, so it's got the, you know, it knows what to scaffold from. And again, I just need to tell it. Yeah, so that should be it. Again, ask me some questions. Yeah, yes, we'll just do all that. So that's now actually generated a UI for us, so that we can start to interact with those REST endpoints and in turn those entities. So let's try and bring that up on the server. So I've just got JBoss EAP here, so I'm just going to deploy the application to the server and start the server. If I've got this all right, it should work. So I'm just going to be using the HSQL in H2 in-memory database here. It's just very easy to get started with when you're building a quick application. So we can see that, yeah, that application's deployed. And I think if I go in my web browser to it, yeah, we can see we've got the application up and running. We've got our tables here. So let's just check and see if I got all of my tables right. So create attendee called Pete. And put my email address in. And save that. Okay, so I've got that. Let's create this session. So getting started. And I can put an attendee in it. And let's double check that's worked. So I've got my, yep, so that's all working. So again, you know, I can go through and I can add some more attendees. So who have we got here? I've got Dan at the back there doing some filming. So we could add him. Dan at filming.com. Okay, so let's do that. And we can go back, check that it's working. Yep, so we can put people in. So very quickly, we've managed to get our application up, something scaffolded. And like I said, this is all standard Java EE and AngularJS code, so really easy to go in and you know, change to how you need it to be. All the views are based around free marker templates, so you can go in and you can customize all these templates if you want to, so you can actually generate apps that look different to this. You know, it's very easy to go in and alter that. So that's the application up, working. But the next thing I wanted to do is get this up and running on OpenShift. Who here has used OpenShift? Okay, so OpenShift is the Red Hat platform as a service. Really easy to get started with. There are a number of different variations to OpenShift, and I'll introduce them as we go along. As you probably are aware, when you're working with cloud, you often get short delays as things have to be provisioned and stood up. So I'm going to use those short delays to introduce some of these technologies to you in a bit more detail. So really easy to get started with OpenShift in JBDS. All you need to do is use the OpenShift tools that come with it. I need to create a connection. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is connect to OpenShift. So I'm just going to be using OpenShift online. And I'll explain the difference between the different OpenShifts in just a bit. See if I can remember my password. So first of all, I have to sign in, which then connects me to OpenShift. And we can see what I've got available on OpenShift already. I've already set up my OpenShift account online, but it's like a 2 or 3 minute job to get this set up. I might have some applications loaded, I don't know. We'll see. No, I've got no applications. So, like I said, before the session, I have set up my OpenShift account, but very easy to connect it into JBDS and then start adding your application to it. So in here, I can just do new application. I'm going to call it RH Sessions. Select the type. I'm going to select JBoss EAP6, just like I'm using locally. So I've got the same app server running remotely and locally. You can embed a load of cartridges into OpenShift, so things like MySQL, Postgres, etc. And if we have time, I'll show you how to embed the MySQL one. So the gear profile is quite important. That refers to the type of resourcing setup you're going to get on OpenShift. So by default, you only have access to small gears. You can pay OpenShift money, and then you get some bigger gears as well. So that's all good. I'm also going to connect this through to the project we were just using in Eclipse, so that we don't have to start creating new projects and so on. So I'll just do that here. So connect that in. Click next, and then it's going to hopefully all work. So we'll just hit finish. So whilst this is working, I'll introduce you to what OpenShift is and how it works. So OpenShift is a platform as a service. Everyone knows what a platform as a service is. So really, for me, it's a really easy way to stand up applications publicly with minimal fuss. I don't have to go and phone anyone up to ask for provisioning or anything like that. Great. OpenShift comes in 3 variants. So there's OpenShift Origin, which is the open source community project around OpenShift. There's OpenShift Online, which is what we're using today. That's a service that's provided by Red Hat. You get, if you sign up, you get 3 gears or 3 slots for free. And then you can pay and you can upgrade that and add more gears and add more resources. And then the one that I think is probably the most interesting for me is OpenShift Enterprise. OpenShift Enterprise is our product that we do around OpenShift, and it's you can take OpenShift Enterprise and install it inside your company and stand up your own platform as a service inside your company. So if you're a big company, and especially if you've got concerns around things like data security, privacy, etc. It's a great way to bring some of the advantages of things like DevOps and PaaS inside your own company. I did want to show you how to do that today, because we have one stood up inside Red Hat, but I forgot to bring my VPN token with me, so I can't actually get on the Red Hat network, so I can't do that. So what we're doing at the moment, hopefully, as long as the Wi-Fi is working, is we're going away to the OpenShift servers, and we're requesting that we create this new application. That's going to do stuff like set up the DNS, get the application space provisioned, set up all of that kind of stuff. What it's then going to do is it's going to create me a Git repository, and then I can put my sources into that Git repository, commit those changes up to OpenShift, and it will take my build, and it will run the build, run the Maven build on the remote machine, and deploy the result into the OpenShift environment. So I just have to put my, as it's Git based, I have to put my passphrase in to access my Git, my SSH public key. Okay. And this is now going to run. The way JBDS does this is it runs the publish when you first set this up. So it's going to take the application we built and push it up to OpenShift and build it up on OpenShift. So hopefully this will all work well. We'll just see what happens as it goes. So we'll just watch this go, and I'll take you through some of the things. So as I said, what we do is we've actually pushed the source for my project up to OpenShift. And then the OpenShift cartridge, when it starts deploying, is going to run the build and do the build. So we've hit a problem there, so I better try and see what that's about. Okay, yeah, so this is a problem that something's gone a bit wrong with some of the Maven repository configuration somewhere, so I'm just going to have to go in and fix that. I'm not quite sure. Someone has broken something somewhere for me, which is very nice of them. But it's very easy to fix. So all of our products are available in Maven. So all I'm doing here is I'm just going to start setting up the Maven, or set up the Maven repository, access to the Maven repository that I need. So okay. Yeah, so we make all of the products and all of the betas of all the products and everything available. So that's all it's doing, is it's just complaining that it can't find something it needs. So this lets me show you how you can interact with the server once you've got it set up. So it just appears as a standard server in JBDS. So you can just publish it to it like you would any old local server. As I said, this is integrated, or this uses Git in the background, so it will offer you ability to do things like set your Git commit message. You could also interact with this through command line Git or through any other Git tooling that you like to use. There's no need to use it through JBDS. Hopefully the build will go through this time. Oh no, this failed again.
Does it automatically commit?
Oh, yeah, it should automatically commit. So it will automatically commit and then do the push. And yeah, that's a good spot. Let's call that Red Hat. There we are. Thank you. Yeah, so it will automatically commit. Yeah. So that's the nice thing about. That's the reason I like this tooling, is because often you just want to. You don't really care what the commit message is when you're doing a build, right? You just want to push it. So if you struggle with this, like I am today, you can war locally and push the binary war up. You don't have to do the remote builds like this. There's also a REST API for doing all of this. So you can also use a REST API to deploy stuff. So if you want to build your own tooling and work with it like that, you can do. There's a command line for working with OpenShift that's available from Red Hat. Honestly, I think the Eclipse tooling is a bit easier to use than that. And of course, there's a web console as well. So, I'm logged in to it here, and we can see that the application I've just created is coming up there and so on. OpenShift has a lot of different cartridge types. You saw a few of them pop up when we were looking at the wizard, but you can run JBoss, you can run Ruby, you can run Python, you can run Rails, you can run Node, you can run all these different things on it. You also get the ability to have a DIY cartridge where you can set up your environment yourself, and you can store what you need yourself. And you can also write your own cartridges. So it's very easy to write your own cartridge using the format of cartridges from OpenShift, and then when you create your application, you just say, here's my cartridge definition, it's stored in a Git repository over there, go and get it and run things up for me. So very easy to do all sorts of different things with it there. So let's hope that my build has worked this time. Yeah, so that's running. Obviously, the first time it does this, it takes a little bit of time because it's got to go and fetch all sorts of Maven dependencies, well, from our cache, luckily. It doesn't have to actually do it from the full internet. But the next time it's going to be much faster because it will have done all those downloads. So you can see now that the build has gone through. It's pushing this out to OpenShift and starting up EAP on OpenShift. So we'll check this in just a minute. And see where we get to. So, by default, you get a subspace of the RH Cloud domain, but you can also associate your own domains with OpenShift quite easily. You just register your domain name and tell them about it, and then it will configure all of that for you. OpenShift also supports things like load balancing, so you can configure load balancing with this, and it will set up multiple servers for you, et cetera, right? So let's see. Oh, it's still starting the cartridge. Okay, so it is unfortunately running slightly slowly today, but that's up and running. So whilst that's starting, I think I've got about another 10 or 15 minutes. So are there any questions from the audience whilst this is working? And then we'll go back and hopefully do a little bit more of what I'm trying to show you here, and then answer a few more questions. Anyone? Yeah.
How easy is it to build your own stuff that follow the way you've done with Forge? You've got a company that's got their own ways of building software, but they want to take advantage of the full infrastructure.
So in terms of taking a project you've built with Forge and then building inside your own company, is that kind of what you're thinking? Or customizing Forge so that...
So use our own boilerplates.
Yeah. So it's pretty easy. Forge uses, as I said, free market templates. So you can just go in and you can customize those free market templates to create the view layers. Other stuff like, so maybe if you've got your own build system or something like that, if you're not using Maven, it's a bit trickier. You probably have to rip some more stuff out. But definitions, they're all generally built from free market templates. So you just go in and you alter the template and change the logic to however you want it to be. So is that the answer you're looking for if I answered the wrong question?
Yeah, no, I think so. Is there a lot of community?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So there's plugins for all sorts of different things. So Forge is great because Forge is really extensible. I mean, Forge itself is, we always present it as this rapid application development tool, but actually really kind of what it is a plugin container into which you can install plugins that can be used to generate projects and to interact with them through the command line. So you can build, there are plugins out there for everything in Java EE and a lot more, but you can also build your own plugins pretty quickly and easily. So if you, for example, you're working with some piece of technology that we don't support, you can go in and you can build a plugin to work with that and create the relevant files for that and interact with it. So I don't use it anymore because the JBDS tooling for OpenShift is really nice to use. But I created a quick plugin to work with OpenShift, for example, for Forge. So you could type like OpenShift setup, and it would go away and create the application on OpenShift and register you an account if you needed one. And that took me a couple of days to write a plugin to do that kind of thing. So it's pretty easy to get started and working with. Let's see if this is. Yeah, this looks better. So there we are. So the app is now up on OpenShift and running. So very quickly, whilst we've got a few more minutes, I just want to show you how you can add OpenShift to this. So add OpenShift to this. Add MySQL to OpenShift. So OpenShift comes with the idea of embedded cartridges. Embedded cartridges run in the same gear, in the same slot as your main cartridge. And so the things you can embed are things like databases, etc. So I'm going to be adding MySQL. So I do that. And what this is going to do is go away and install MySQL into the cartridge and give me access. It's going to start up that MySQL instance when I restart the cartridge and give me easy access to it from JBoss. The other thing, I better wait for that to finish because otherwise it's going to give me all sorts of problems. So this shouldn't take very long, hopefully. Any more questions whilst we're waiting for this to happen? No? Okay. Okay, that's done. So that went through quickly. So that's good. So I can just do that, and then I can come back to my application. Now, my application is going to need a small amount of customization to use that database, obviously, because I need a slightly different persistence XML or slightly different data source definition in order to use that MySQL database. So what I'm going to quickly do is copy the existing resources directory and make those changes. I'm just going to make those changes directly in this existing thing. So when you set up the MySQL database on OpenShift, it creates a MySQL data source for you automatically in EAP, so I don't need to go in and create that data source. So I'm just going to switch it over in this configuration here. And then I can go and I can publish this up to OpenShift. So let me run that. So the other thing that I wanted to show you quickly whilst I'm doing this is so once I've got OpenShift, so I've got MySQL running up in here, that's great, but I probably just want to check that it's actually all working, right? I'm not going to just trust that I've magically switched the database. So the quickest way to do that is probably to SSH into the application, run MySQL and check that I've got data in the database. So you get an SSH connection into. That's not right. That's a copy. Yeah. So you get an SSH connection in, so I should be able to do that. So I can just SSH into the instance that I'm running on, and then I've got access to the file system, and I can run commands locally and look at logs or anything that I need to like that to see what's going on. Let's see how my build is going at the same time. So where are we? Console. Okay, so it's starting again, so that's perfect. So all I can do is just run the MySQL commands. So let's check if that worked. Yeah, so I've got the RH sessions database now set up in here. I'm using Hibernate in auto-create mode, so it's just auto-creating all the tables for me as I go. So if I just use that database now, so we haven't got the tables configured yet, so not sure why we haven't got the tables configured yet. Okay, so we're still, there we are. So it was still deploying the application whilst I was looking there, so I better check the application's up before I do anything else. No, the application's still got a moment or two to start. So let's see now if the tables are in there. I haven't quite got there yet. So this would be a good point to show you some of the other things you can do. So for example, a common thing to do is to want to look at the logs. So again, really easy from in JBDS. You just use this tail files command, and it will automatically bring up the logs for you. Oh, it looks like I've broken the data source somehow. I'm not sure what I've done. Oh no. So yeah, somehow in here I've managed to get, I managed to break the data source, and I'm not sure what I've done now. Let's see. So that's why the application's not up yet. Should work. So somehow I've managed to break this, and I don't know quite.
The JBoss 6 from the console.
Sorry, can you?
Can you see that in console?
Yes. Yeah. So if I go back to here, I'm pretty sure if I just do that, whether it's so I can I can bring up the JBoss CLI, and I can then go in and debug and find out what mistake I've made in this session. So I did want to leave a couple more minutes for questions in case anyone's got any questions about what I've talked about today. Anyone? Yep. Sure. So cartridges are, so really when you build a package, is the ability to do stuff when you start and do stuff when you stop. That kind of is the core thing you need to be able to do. So when for some reason you send a restart signal to your application, it does something to restart the application. At the end of the day, what that really boils down to is executing a series of shell scripts. So you have some script that starts up JBoss, and you have some script that starts up MySQL, and you have some script that starts up this, and I mean that's what at the end of the day starting and stopping anything boils down to, is running commands. So what a cartridge is it's essentially a collection of shell scripts that work together in order to do something. And so, for example, what the JBoss cartridge is doing is when you restart the application, it's killing JBoss. It's recording the PID to kill JBoss, shutting it down, and restarting it for you. And so a cartridge is really nothing more than a collection of shell scripts that do things like install the necessary software that you need using RPMs and YARN and things like that, and then a set of configuration scripts that do things to stand things up and shut things down when you send the relevant signals. And obviously it can get more complicated. So if you're going to start doing load balancing, you might have different scripts that would do different things. You can have embedded cartridges. So an embedded cartridge like we have with MySQL adds MySQL to the existing cartridge. So it adds some more shell scripts that do some more things to do it. So that for me, I'm not an ops guy. I'm not an OpenShift guy. I'm a developer. But that for me is how I think of what a cartridge is. It's a series of commands that get run automatically to start things up and shut things down. So if you use Docker, so Docker is another way to do this that I think is pretty interesting. And is another way of doing something very similar to this, right? It's a way of starting things and stopping things. A lot of what something like OpenShift is, in my opinion, is orchestration. It's orchestrating things to work together and giving you that kind of that unified management layer in order to make these things work together. At the end of the day, the hard part is not how do I start JBoss. The hard part is how do I make this all work together, and that's the OpenShift environment, really.
It sounds like there's a Git cartridge, right? That's spun up.
So no, Git is really baked right into the core of this. Yeah, yeah.
Is there an interface where we can actually see commits and changes, like maybe a web interface?
So for the Git repository, no, I don't think there's a web interface. I mean, you can clone the Git repository and run git log to see the history for it. So there are three ways. Well, there's two ways of doing it, right? So the first way is through Git, and the second way is there is also a REST API. So if you don't want to use the Git interface, you can also use the REST API. So I can say, here's my war. I'm going to send it to this REST endpoint and get the REST endpoint to deploy it. So the Git one is the one that I always end up showing because it's kind of the good one in a sort of single user environment to get started with. But if you're looking for something that is scriptable or you want to put your own tools around, then the REST API is really useful. And that, I mean, has a full REST API, right? So that's how the JBDS tooling, not for the deployment of applications, it does use Git there, but for the rest of it, it uses the REST API to be setting up cartridges, creating applications, etc. So there's a full REST API. There's a Java library for the REST API, etc., etc. Anyone else? Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of DevNation, and I'll see you around.